At the beginning of the Torah portion of Noach, we read about this very interesting figure who is described as righteous in his generation. What does that mean, righteous in his generation? So Rashi, in his commentary, says that Noah would only righteous compared to his own generation, but in any other generation, he would not be considered particularly, especially righteous. Why? So the Zohar classically explains that Noach failed to pray for the benefit of his generation. God said, I'm bringing a flood, so he builds the ark, he saves himself, and of course, I'm sure he cared about the rest of the generation, but not enough. This is the indictment which is said about him, that he did not care enough for the people of his generation. What was his tikkun, his spiritual correction? So Rabbi Isaac Luria, 16th century Kabbalist, says that Noah was reincarnated as Moses. And that brought about his tikkun, his spiritual repair. Why? Because that's exactly what Moses did the whole time, pray for his generation. He was always defending the Jews in the eyes of God. And that is why that corrected Noah's mistake of failing to do so. And actually, if we read it later on in the Torah portion, in chapter 7, verse 23, we see actually a hint to this. God washed away all existence that was on the face of the earth. The Hebrew word for that is vayamach. He wiped it away. And what did Moses say when God wanted to eliminate the Jewish people? In Exodus 32:32, if you're going to get rid of the Jewish people, then please erase me from this book. Please erase me. Mecheni, wash, it's the same word, vayamach, mecheni, wash me away. So we see that Noah, his word, the flood, the washing away of the flood was later, came across, subliminally of course, in the words of Moses, his later reincarnation. If you listened to last week's Torah and 10, you would have heard about a cosmic disaster when Adam separated from his wife for 130 years, and in that time the seed that he wasted involuntarily led to the creation of deeply, deeply dysfunctional souls. Now, twice in this week's Torah portion, in the Torah portion of Noah, these dysfunctional souls re-emerge. First of all, they are the generation of the flood. This wicked generation who God decides is just going to destroy because there's no hope for them. Where do we see that? It's actually hinted to in chapter 6, verse 7. God says, I will wash away man. But the word he used for man is Adam. I will wash away Adam. Why does it say that? Because these are actually spiritually speaking, they're the children of Adam. They're the dysfunctional souls which he brought into being. Therefore God says, I'm going to wash them away. Later on, we have the event of the Tower of Babel. And again, we see the same expression. Chapter 11, verse 5, God descended to see the city and the tower that the descendants of Adam had built, the Bnei Adam. They were the children of Adam more literally than you might imagine, because they were actually souls that had been brought into being by this tragic cosmic catastrophe of his separation of his wife. So that's twice these souls are reincarnated. We will see in a couple of weeks' time these dysfunctional souls reappearing again before they finally achieve their tikkun, their spiritual healing. Chapter 11, verse 27 reads, These are the offspring of Terach. Terach fathered Avram, Nochar, and Haran. Haran fathered Lot. Now, what is the spiritual mapping behind these great souls? Adam, the first man, committed the sin of the tree of knowledge. And this is considered to be a consummate sin, which encompasses all future possible sins. So therefore, it's equivalent to the three cardinal sins of murder, infidelity, and idol worship. And therefore, Adam had to be reincarnated 3 times to atone for these 3 cardinal sins. And he was reincarnated into Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for this purpose. Abraham atoned, achieved tikkun for Adam's sin, so to speak, of idol worship. Because, of course, Abraham was the great pioneer of the monotheistic idea, and he challenged the whole world about it, rejecting idol worship. But actually, Abraham's brother, who's mentioned here in the Torah, Haran, was also supposed to achieve this goal. His life, his soul descended into this world also to achieve tikkun for Adam's sin of idol worship. But he failed. Because even though he jumped into Nimrod's fiery furnace, he only did that because Abraham succeeded, not because he really believed in monotheism. So therefore he had to be reincarnated, because a soul always has to eventually achieve its tikkun, its spiritual healing. Whom did Haran become reincarnated into? You'll never guess who. It was Aaron, the high priest. Because what was his great challenge? His great challenge was to stop the sin of the golden calf. When Moses had gone up the mountain and he disappeared, no one knew where he was, so they started building this calf. He was the one that was supposed to stop it, which he was only partially successful in. He delayed it to the next day, but they still worshipped it. So but that was his mission in life. So we see that Haran was reincarnated into to Aaron, interestingly. Chapter 9, verse 7 reads, "As for you, I am commanding you to be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth and become numerous on it." Now, for those of you who read last week's Torah portion, you will remember that in Genesis 1:28, we already read the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. Why was it repeated here? So if you read the two verses, there's a slight difference. In Genesis 1:28, man is told to be fruitful, multiply, to populate the earth, and to conquer it. Kivshua. Whereas here in the repetition of the command to Noah after the flood, it just says populate the earth and become numerous. There's no command to conquer it. What's the difference? So, the idea of being fruitful and multiply, in its spiritual sense, doesn't just mean having kids. It means spreading the ideas of monotheism, the awareness of God, the consciousness of something higher, some sort of deeper spirituality. Be fruitful and multiply, gush forth with spirituality until it fills the entire world. Now, how are you going to do that? Are you going to do that in a male aggressive fashion or in a female intuitive fashion? The male stereotype, which is of course not true of all men, but it's predominant, is one of aggression. Go conquer the world. Go and with your ego suppress the will of others till they fall in line with what you desire. That's the kind of male approach. The female approach is more one of empathy, of intuition, of nurturing the goodness that another person has from within, bringing out that other person's talents and not forcing your own ideas aggressively on them. God repeats the command to be fruitful and multiply, omitting the detail of conquer, because conquering just failed. When we tried the male-dominant approach of forcing ideas on everyone else, the flood resulted. So now a new approach is required, and that is one more of the feminine. True spirituality can only be achieved with a more feminine approach of intuition, of empathy, of nurturing other people, and not trying to force your will on theirs. Chapter 11, verse 30, Sarah was barren, she had no child. Now there's a repetition. Obviously if you're barren, then you have no children. What is the point of that? So the Zohar explains that when a couple are together, even if they don't produce a physical child, they nevertheless produce souls in heaven. Even if people, tragically, a couple are infertile, they nevertheless are parenting souls, which, says the Zohar, are the souls of the future converts to Judaism. Very beautifully. So therefore, Sarai was barren. She was creating souls, but she had no child. We need the repetition to inform us that even though spiritual children were born, no physical child resulted. Spiritual message for this week. Of course, Parshat Noach, we have the symbol of the rainbow. God shows us the rainbow to promise that He's never going to destroy the world again. This is really a message of security. The rainbow is teaching us that the world really is safe, contrary to what we know and believe and encounter in everyday life. The world is a safe place. Where does your security come from? Think about it this week. Does your security come from your imagined wealth or your success or your reputation? Security comes from God. Security comes from being anchored in the correct, appropriate, nourishing, fulfilling spiritual values. So think about that this week, and especially if you see a rainbow, whenever you see a rainbow, the message is, of course, that security comes from above and not from human achievements. Please join us again next week for Torah in 10.